only takes one time to turn things around. And once that momentum shift and change happens, the whole trajectory flips. Gateway South, the goal is to make St. Louis and the St. Louis region, called construction capital of the U.S. For the top 50 contractors in the U.S. are headquartered here. All of the Class 1 rail lines that run through St. Louis hit within a mile of the site. It's really just a win-win opportunity for the region and the city. It didn't matter what your experience level necessarily was, and it was very merit-based. So however much you put in, you're able to kind of grow quickly from that. Blockchain is an area where, if it's connected to real estate in the right way, can make a lot of sense to improve efficiency and allow different projects to happen in a smart way. The more perspectives you can have on something, the better of an understanding you'll get in whatever the thing is that you're trying to pay attention to or understand.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
Good.
Good. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
So we'll just kind of get right into it. Obviously, you're the founder of Good Developments Group, who is spearheading the Gateway South development project, which is going to be, I don't know if it's 95 or 100 total acres, south of 40 along the riverfront and even extending a little west of that. So just an amazing project for St. Louis, for the development of the city, and just very inspiring work that you're doing. So I guess to get us started, what is kind of your vision that you have with Good Developments Group, or just specifically with the Gateway South development, over the next couple of years?
Yeah, sure. So let's start with Gateway South. We can pull into Good Developments a little bit more. Gateway South, the goal is to make St. Louis and the St. Louis region, called construction capital of the U.S. The construction and design and built environment industry, particularly construction, is lagging behind other major industries in terms of efficiency and the efficiency gains and improvements that have taken place in almost every other industry over the last 100 years, 50 years, where in the construction industry there hasn't been the same level of efficiency gain. And I think that ties very directly back to affordability of somebody being able to buy a home or afford their rent. And currently there isn't a real geographic hub for the industry. I think St. Louis is extremely well poised to be that hub. And I would think of the project more as kind of a spark to integrate and connect all the stuff happening in the region and the St. Louis MSA, where Gateway South can be, a center point, but ties into the work that's already going on in the St. Louis region, but in the industry as a whole.
Yeah. So kind of along those lines, I know you were talking about like the construction hub, and it's I've heard it compared to like Silicon Valley or Hollywood, one of these industry hubs, and so construction is what you're focusing on. What was it that made this geographic location so appealing for a hub like that?
Yeah, so a handful of different things. I think one is the expertise in the region currently in the construction sector.
Yeah.
For the top 50 contractors in the U.S. are headquartered here. There's also a really strong advanced manufacturing heritage and expertise. And I think as the construction sector continues to expand and grow and improve in efficiency over the next, call it decade, manufacturing and construction are going to see merging, if you will. So the fact that St. Louis, as a the St. Louis area and the MSA has such a strong, call it per capita expertise in the space, plus such strong advanced manufacturing heritage and expertise, really lends itself well to being a hub. In addition to that, from an operating cost standpoint, especially compared to the coasts, the St. Louis area is really strong. And then from a site-specific standpoint, we're really at what we call multi-modal heaven.
Yeah.
So most heavily trafficked site in the region, and then right on the Mississippi River, and all of the Class 1 rail lines that run through St. Louis hit within a mile of the site. So really at a point where, from a multimodal standpoint, you can connect to basically every form of transport, which is key.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, so when you're talking about the multimodal transportation, it's going to be the 3, even 4 highways that are right there, the Mississippi River, and the rail lines running through.
Yep.
So is it the combination of those 3 that makes it the most highly trafficked point in the region, or is that strictly just from a highway standpoint?
Yeah, that's just from a highway standpoint.
Interesting.
But then having all 3, whenever you're transporting something, you want as many kind of means of moving materials and parts and pieces as possible. So the fact that there are multiple forms of transport accessible from the site is extremely appealing.
Yeah.
And a large portion of the project is industrial. So having manufacturing use in a downtown location with access to all those means of transportation is really valuable for users or tenants for us.
Yeah. Do you know what, at this point, so obviously I believe it's phase 1 is going to be the reconstruction of 2 large industrial buildings.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an idea of what's going to be manufactured there that could benefit from these modes of transportation?
Yeah, so the phase 1 is a combo of some historic rehabilitation and along with some new built-to-suit industrial facilities. From an industrial standpoint, there will be a company that does equipment sales and rentals. So that location is really beneficial from that standpoint. And then also some offsite builders, and then some more traditional contractors that potentially tie into that offsite building sector of the industry.
Yeah.
Where you're doing what would normally be done on a job site, but from a indoor facility that is environmentally controlled, and then shipping those parts and pieces out to the job site to be installed in their final location.
Interesting. Yeah, so you're bringing into a climate environment control environment where some tasks that would happen on a construction project, I mean, at this point, almost all components of construction are happening where the building is being built. So you're trying to or at this hub, there will be the opportunity to bring some of those tasks off-site and then mobilize them to the job site itself.
Yeah, exactly. And what I'd say is more and more of the industry is shifting towards some form of off-site construction as we're getting more advanced from a design standpoint and technological standpoint. It's a lot easier to build parts and pieces off-site that then can get shipped to the job site. Also with labor shortages and just the overall labor market in construction, having a downtown location where the workforce can get to makes it appealing for companies that are building things to be setting up shop and, building as much as possible offsite. And then over time, really more and more of that can shift to offsite construction means and methods, just from an efficiency standpoint. That doesn't mean that the entire building necessarily needs to be built in giant Lego blocks per se. But, for example, like curtain wall is a good example of a piece of a building that is typically done off-site. It's the enclosure for a building. Typically, those are built off-site and then shipped to a job site and clipped into place to form the enclosure of a structure.
Okay. That's interesting. And do you see, I guess over time, you'd imagine that more and more of these components are going to be able to be constructed off-site?
Yeah.
That's common now, but, ideally if we have an innovation hub that's perfecting their craft, it starts getting more efficient.
Yeah, exactly. And then by co-locating a bunch of different players that are operating in that space, for each of those individual players, it becomes more efficient for them to be building stuff off-site and shipping it to a job site for final installation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Because construction is a pretty siloed business. So like you've got the contractor who's, sourcing jobs and parts from all kinds of different subs. And there are two big things that come to mind for me just watching construction projects. The climate control is big for me because especially in St. Louis where the weather's constantly changing, for employee satisfaction, just being able to go into climate control every day would be very nice. But even just for production efficiency, because the amount of times where I'm talking to contractors who are, they're working 2 days a week, 3 weeks out of the month, depending on what month we're in, because we're getting hit with rain and snow and all this. That's one of the biggest slowdowns on projects, at least in St. Louis, and I imagine in other regions it's worse. But yeah, to your point, having this hub where they can collaborate and reduce that friction of communication. Because like if you're a construction worker who's on site trying to build something out, and now you're going through 3 levels of communication to like make a change on a project, that could take weeks or months of restarting a project, as opposed to like having that hub all together. I'm sure it's going to reduce that friction and time lag to make changes to a project.
Yeah, definitely. And also, even from a, less complicated standpoint, just getting to the place of work every day.
Yeah.
If you're in a downtown location, it's somewhere where people throughout the region can get to. If you're a worker that's, working for a construction company and you have job site out west and a job site south and job site north, and you're shifting between those different locations week to week or day to day, or even throughout the course of a day, it can become very difficult to get to your job.
Yeah.
And by shifting to more of a manufacturing type of an approach, it makes it a lot more efficient for workers to be able to get to, their place of work. Which, if you don't have a car, for example, that is a, very important factor in having a downtown location that's, production based and, job focused. And then from a, efficiency of just understanding how much pay you're getting and having the certainty of number of hours worked, that's also a really beneficial factor for people getting into the industry in the first place.
Yeah. Just more of a routine. You can create a predictable work schedule through this environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it is. I know that's a problem for a lot of construction workers too. Is the seasonality of it?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so now I've got like 3 jobs throughout the year because I've got to switch depending on, what the climate's
Yeah.
like.
And a lot of guys are employed by the job or whatever job they're working on,
Right.
Which makes it difficult to finish the job in certain instances because you don't know where you're going next.
Yeah.
And by working for a company where you have some more certainty in number of hours and schedule and whatnot, it can make getting into the industry make a lot more sense, and just your day-to-day paycheck and place of work being the same location can just really improve lifestyles.
Yeah.
Even without shifting too much other than that, which I think is also very key.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I know, and that probably leads a little bit into the future phases of the project as well, because I know right now it's super industrial focused, but when I was kind of looking at the plans outlined for the project, you even get into more retail and even some residential sector, not on this first phase, but it looks like phase 2 and 3 might incorporate a little bit more of that. What do you kind of envision once you're past the industrial portion?
So a couple of things to note there. The nice thing about the way we set up the project, and from a financial standpoint and just like a momentum standpoint, after the first phase, we don't need to necessarily wait to do another big phase.
Yeah.
I think we've created enough critical mass where you can go building by building after the first phase. And then creating a kind of mixed use hub is really beneficial from an efficiency standpoint of the site in general.
Yeah.
So I'd say we'll continue to build all sorts of different uses down there. Residential definitely makes a lot of sense over time for workers, and also definitely with the growth of the industry within the region, that the location, typically any other city I've really looked at from a development standpoint or done development in riverfront location and locations that are next to major landmarks, generally really sought after locations from a residential standpoint. So over time, that location should have a lot of demand for residential. Obviously, I think one of the keys there is bringing the industry in first, and then for the companies operating out of the district, having a place to showcase their work product is really beneficial from a marketing standpoint, and also just from an efficiency standpoint. If you're building something offsite and shipping it across the street, that's a smart way to showcase what you can do, and showcase to different people that are going to be able to see that location because of the visibility, being next to the arch, being next to Busch Stadium. Very key.
Interesting. So that piece where you said where you're able to demonstrate what you do, so you're saying after the industrial, so taking the processes and the parts that are being manufactured on your sites to further develop the rest of the project will be a good showcase for the development itself.
Exactly, for the development itself, and also even for the companies or
The
tenants, if you will,
contractors.
that are operating out of the district.
Yeah.
So it's a very symbiotic relationship, if you will, between the future phases and the companies that are operating out of the district. And then even from an attraction of new companies that want to come into the district, there's so many different parts and pieces to making a building. So after the first phase and additional buildings that continue on, those companies that are manufacturing making a part or piece that can play in well with the existing tenants, it makes it a really compelling case for those companies to move into the district or set up shop.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is pretty cool. It gives a little bit of a first mover advantage to whichever contractors are the first to inhabit that industrial space.
Yeah, definitely that. And I also think one thing we've really been focused on is creating the right mix where as the thing grows over time, it becomes more efficient and beneficial for all the different players within the ecosystem. Not just from an industrial standpoint, but talking about different universities or design firms, or even the supportive services like legal and accounting and marketing. The larger the district grows, the more beneficial it is to be a part of it.
Right.
Whether it's data collection or co-location of manufacturing uses or providing support services for companies that are operating in the district, as the thing grows, it becomes even more beneficial for all of those players to be a part of the district.
Yeah, that's a wild concept. And I know because you're working a little bit with the council or advisor on the Cortex development as well, right?
Yeah, we had worked with one of the guys who was the former CEO of Cortex, Dennis, and the former chairman of the board, Hank, for Cortex, who was over at WashU, and definitely used a lot of the things that were learned from that innovation district and also other innovation districts around the country and the world to see, how do you utilize those lessons that were learned and also see what can, be improved upon.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That network effect is something that I hadn't even really thought about on how it grows itself.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so cool. Do you? When does construction begin on the first two buildings?
So, in the next, the first half of this year, I'd say what people would traditionally consider construction.
Yeah.
Will be taking place. We've started some, initial work already, but there are a handful of different hurdles and things and different reviews that need to get past, which we're actually now getting through all those, which is great. So
yeah, a lot of red tape, or just
not so much just red tape, but more a factor of the scale of the project and getting everything lined up and at once to be able to push forward.
Yeah.
There are some aspects of review process requirements that everything can be more efficient, but overall it's been good from that standpoint. But from a leasing standpoint to cultural review standpoint to all of our approvals and different tax credit requirements and whatnot that we've been working through and are past a lot of those milestones now, which is very nice.
Yeah. It is amazing on development how much work needs to happen before the actual work, or before the work that the public sees.
Exactly.
Yeah, because like you and I were talking before this. I think the first time we met was probably 2 years ago.
Yep.
And it felt like we were far, or like you guys were far along at that point.
Yeah.
And so now it's like 2 years later, and the public still, like, people have now heard about it. I mean, I've been singing it from the rooftops that this is coming for a while, and
Yeah.
so now I do notice people are a lot more familiar with the project than they were when I first brought it up, which is good. And once the actual public-facing construction begins, I think that's just going to further promote it.
Yeah, definitely. And hopefully also, not just within the St. Louis region and MSA, but also, throughout the country. There's definitely a significant amount of attention, which I think is really unique and interesting for St. Louis.
Yeah.
Because nationally there isn't typically is, much attention on this market as there is on some other major markets in the country. But I think that attention can be really beneficial for the St. Louis region as a whole.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I'm so excited about this project, and why I'm like, just wait, Gateway South is coming. Like, it's all like St. Louis is on the rise. People are talking about, because that's what I admire too, is you were pointing out how great these grounds are that you're developing on in terms of multimodal transportation on the riverfront, next to the Gateway Arch. It's and the national park surrounding the arch. Everybody who lives in St. Louis has known that there's so much value to tap into in our city, and yet people have not been stepping up to the plate like I think a lot of St. Louisans would hope would have happened by now. So it is such, I think it's going to prove to be an inspiring project for a lot of St. Louisans, which I think is worth noting, is that you're not originally from St. Louis, which almost makes it even more inspiring that somebody is coming in. It's almost like a fresh lens, seeing the potential here. But I know you're familiar with St. Louis. You spent a lot of time here. What is it that drew you to St. Louis originally?
So originally, I went to WashU.
Yeah.
So that was my reason for coming and moving to St. Louis. And my mom had actually gone to WashU as well. I think her parents, she grew up in the New York area, also, which is where I'm from. Her parents had told her she can go as far as the Mississippi River for college. So I think that's why she wound up at WashU. But coming to WashU and seeing the city, and then my brother and sister also ended up going to WashU as well. As someone coming from New York and seeing the benefits and great aspects of that city, I think St. Louis obviously is a very different city, but had a ton of really awesome features and aspects that I enjoyed during my time at the school, and from that I always saw kind of the opportunity that existed in St. Louis. Also recognizing the history of the city, as in the early 1900s, St. Louis was the fourth largest city in the U.S. It presented a really kind of cool opportunity to take a city that currently is seen some, I don't know if I'd call it decline, but has been somewhat stagnant over the last 50 years, let's say, and be able to do something that can maybe turn around that trajectory, you will.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it is. And that's what I'm always thinking about that with St. Louis. It's like the building we're sitting in, built in 1903, like in anticipation of the World's Fair, the Olympics coming here. You go to like Union Station and you see like New York, Chicago, St. Louis as like the big three cities.
Yep.
And, you're a St. Louis sitting here now. It's like, where did we drop the ball on this one? Like we had so much momentum going. And we don't need to get into the whole history of it, but
yeah, I think part of it is just the belief in the great aspects of the city.
Yeah.
And the recognition of that from people in the city, and maybe sometimes takes somewhat of an outside perspective to be able to see that. But I think everyone who's here that I've talked to now that I live here full time, there's somewhat of a disbelief in the ability for the city to turn around, but at the same time like a recognition of all of the great aspects of the city. And I think as soon as that momentum starts to shift in the other direction, it becomes a lot easier for everyone to see what can happen in the city. But because of the last 50 years or so, it's not as easy for people to see that taking place as quickly.
Yeah.
Because they've seen it go in the other direction.
Yeah.
But to me, it only takes one time to turn things around.
Yeah.
You will.
Yeah.
And once that momentum shift and change happens, the whole trajectory flips.
Right. I think that is it's very true what you're saying too. Especially in St. Louis, we've got the county and the city. I grew up in the county, live in the city now, but a lot of times people, live in the county, grew up in the county, and their parents don't want them to leave the county to go to the city. I live in the city now, and it's like, oh my gosh, there's so much that I was missing,
Yeah.
And once you get in there, once your boots on the ground, your everyday life is in the city, you're like, wow, this is very nice. Like,
Yeah.
And you start to have an appreciation for everything that our city has to offer. And to your point, I think, it takes a mighty effort to get the momentum going, but I think there is a lot of energy that's kind of in the reserves that should propel that momentum. And going back to when you were at Wash U, you obviously that's located in the city. What was your experience like there? I know obviously outside of school, I know you were a triple major, you were on the baseball team, so you had a lot of accomplishments, but what else did you do in St. Louis City, and what do you like to do here?
So I think from a sports standpoint, the fact that I played sports at WashU and also could tap into the different, professional sports teams and going to the games and whatnot here, particularly compared to New York where I came from, it's a lot easier to be able to go to a game or, see a Blues game or go to the Cardinals game here than it is in, a New York. But in addition to that, the food scene here is incredibly good, and from a price standpoint, especially compared to New York, it's great. And I also really thought the Forest Park, and I didn't know as much when I was at WashU, but some of the other parks like Tower Grove Park, and Benton Park, and the Soulard area, there are parts of the city that are really great from a cultural standpoint and from just different activities to go and do. And then from an architectural standpoint, there's some really awesome history here and just great architectural parts and pieces of the city that are very unique compared to other cities around the U.S.
Yeah.
Soulard is a good example of that, or Lafayette Square.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree. Those neighborhoods are so nice, and I know one of the things that can be frustrating for developers in the city is the preservation. Like the historic preservation is a big factor here, but what they've been able to preserve and how beautiful they've kept these neighborhoods, in my opinion, it feels worth it.
Yeah, they're for us. There are a handful of buildings on site that we actually just added to the historic register. The tax credit program here in Missouri is really strong. It makes doing historic preservation possible compared to other cities where you don't have the same type of program that can allow you to do development of existing buildings. I think taking the history and design intent and architectural significance of the existing structures and integrating the new design and buildings into and alongside those is when you get some really cool projects. But it's important to find the right use case for those and to figure out what the right programming is to make those historic structures worthwhile.
Yeah.
Where if you have your concept for a development plan without taking into account what's already there, it can make it very difficult to figure out how to tie those existing structures and buildings and whatnot into your new development concept for a site.
Yeah, so when you were approaching this development, obviously with with the historic elements that existed, did you come at it with the lens like, okay, let's have this on our radar that some of these are going to have to be preserved to some degree, so let's make sure we're approaching that on the front end as opposed to building out our plan and then realizing we have to start over?
Yeah, we definitely took into account what was already on site, and that's kind of how we set up the programming for the site, where the location, the portion of the site that has a lot of historic structures and existing architecture that's very significant is where we have more of a kind of walkable campus type of an area versus the portion of the site or further south that doesn't have that same level of historic nature is where more of the industrial use is. So we basically use that to inform how we laid out the development as a whole.
Yeah.
So definitely took that into account and let it kind of determine our programming for the project.
Yeah. What were, and this is, going off topic, but to spend a little time on like you and how you got here outside of the project. At WashU, I had read that you had triple majored. What were those majors?
I did an entrepreneurship major.
Okay.
And then marketing major and an organizational behavior major, all in the business school. So kind of diverse set of majors. I spent a lot of time figuring out which classes I could take that would line up the most majors.
Yeah.
So some of it was, I would call it pre-planning.
Yeah, right.
More than just taking a million classes. But that worked out really well and allowed me to, I think that type of planning isn't something that's always taught or isn't a focus from a university standpoint, but I actually think that was a really beneficial thing from my standpoint is to lay all those things out, understand what the requirements are, and then plan to pick, classes that would pair well together.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. What was the third? Organizational
behavior.
Behavior. That's really, it almost sounds like a psychology course,
Yeah.
business psychology.
It's somewhat like organizational structures and how to set up a business and
Yeah.
how to understand things like supply chains, but also, understand your corporate structure and how that plays into the type of business you're running, or how a small business versus a large corporation might function. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I've noticed in talking to you, you're definitely very like meticulous in your thought patterns. You definitely plan a lot, and it's interesting with the entrepreneurship major. Had as a kid, did you always have like that entrepreneurial mindset? Were you, starting businesses as a kid, or what was it like growing up with Greg?
So I wouldn't necessarily say starting businesses or whatnot. I spent a lot of time playing sports. I definitely always was someone who had my own way of thinking about things,
Yeah.
and didn't subscribe to whatever everybody was telling me how to think about something, or I tend to almost intentionally try and see things from a different perspective than the typical, mindset is about any sort of activity or way of viewing something. I just think the more perspectives you can have on something, the better of an understanding you'll get in whatever the thing is that you're trying to pay attention to or understand. So I've always kind of had a different viewpoint, if you will,
Yeah.
than most people on things. And I think it's always a good way to find something that can be changed or improved upon, or it's a good way of figuring out what to spend time on.
Yeah.
Is what's going on that doesn't seem to make sense, that most people have a very set opinion of
Mm-hmm.
how it's happening and why it's happening in that particular way, and taking a step back and thinking about it from kind of a unique or contrarian type of lens just gives you a different perspective on what's happening and what's taking place.
Yeah.
So then from a sports mindset, I think by spending so much time playing sports as a little kid, it gave me a very, I'd say, a good view on understanding feedback and having a very not overinflated view on how good I was at something or what needed to be improved upon.
Yeah.
In sports, you want to hear about what you're not doing well more than what you're doing well.
Yeah.
Because when you get onto the field to play whatever you're playing, it doesn't really matter if somebody says, "Oh, you're good at this," or "You're good at that." It's just like, all right, what can I get better at? And the playing field is somewhat level, if you will.
Yeah.
So, spending a lot of time with that mindset, you recognize, how much you need to work to be exceptional at something, which I think was really important, and also learning to be part of a team. I think sports are very important for that.
Yeah.
You don't win any, unless you're playing tennis or golf or something.
Right.
You don't win anything on your own.
Yeah.
So I think recognizing the value in teamwork and being having a whole set of other people that are, like your little family,
Yeah.
if you will, when you're playing sports, was really important, and I think applies really well to business if done right. And in the same way in sports, if somebody in your team isn't working hard enough or isn't doing their job or their role effectively, other people on the team aren't worried about telling them, not in a negative way necessarily, but to help pick them up to get them to the level that they need to get to for you and the team to win, was something that I always felt was really important for business, which these days doesn't always, have the same, isn't utilized as much as I think it should be.
That constructive criticism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like taking criticism or viewpoints on how to do something better,
right,
not as a negative but as a positive, is super important for being able to improve and reach whatever highest potential you can get to.
Yeah. Did you find what position did you play when you were at WashU?
Played shortstop and second base. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Were those always the positions you played growing up?
Mainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I pitched a little also.
Yeah. I feel like, especially on like youth teams, if you were a good athlete, they're like, all right, let's try you pitching.
Yeah.
If you were a shortstop, they're like, oh, we got to try this guy on the mound.
Yeah. Yep.
That's funny. Did you find as a kid you were pretty good at taking that feedback and constructive criticism, or is that something you kind of aged into as you?
I think I was pretty good about that as a kid. And, my parents were pretty straightforward with me about, about it. And I was always, I could see how good everybody else was at things and how good I was at things. And I was pretty, had a very clear perspective on that myself. So I didn't I would say was generally harder on myself than other people would be. And because of that, that kind of constructive criticism was just a way to get better at the things I wasn't good at, as opposed to something where I saw myself as getting knocked down by those things. So I think I always took that positively.
Yeah, I think that's a really admirable characteristic. And I think that too, I feel like when I was younger, I wasn't as good at I think I've gotten much better, but being able to take that step back and look at yourself from an objective standpoint is almost like a skill that I've had to build as I've gotten older. I played sports a lot growing up too. I was the youngest of 5. And when I look back at certain things, being the youngest of 5 is nice because you're naturally better at sports than everybody when you're 6 through 10, because you just have been playing with your older siblings your whole life. So then when I look back at certain things where I was like, all right, now kids are all starting to get as good as you and you have to work at this skill development. I remember, not being as receptive to that early on, and you kind of have to be humbled, certainly I did, into realizing, there's a lot of work I have to do to get a little bit better.
Yeah.
But it doesn't surprise me that that's been kind of a skill that you've had for your whole life, at least as far as you can recall. And then I know when you were at WashU as well, you had started a business while you were there. And when I read about it, it looked like you were really thinking pretty simply from a, first principles point of view. Can you tell us a little bit about that business you started?
Yeah, so at WashU, they had these student-run businesses where students could go and work together and create a business that they would that you would have people who are on campus utilize. We had me and a bunch of friends had a company called Wide on Water, where we would deliver like those office type coolers and water jugs to people's dorm rooms on a monthly basis. There's also one that did like your laundry, and one that stored your furniture and stuff over the summer and winter if you were as you were switching from wherever you were living one year to the next. It was good to have a business that you actually needed to execute on, and there are like real world consequences to how well you operated the business. I think it was a really cool, interesting program that WashU did, and it's one of the reasons why the entrepreneurship program there is really, really strong. It was fun, and it was a learning experience, and we did pretty well in executing on that, operating that business and then selling it. Looking back now, it wasn't like we were doing the best job.
Yeah, right.
But it just shows you, how much the little details matter, and how, the difference between doing schoolwork
right
versus, doing operating business in the real world. And I think from WashU's standpoint, it's really cool opportunity from a experiential learning, if you will, standpoint.
Yeah, that is cool. It sounds like a very cool program. Because you're able to see the implementation and timeliness and execution matter, especially in that was it was product, but also very much service business. If you're a couple days late on the water, people start noticing.
Yes.
I'm sure there were some learning experiences there.
Yeah, definitely. And even, I'd say just much from a sales standpoint, just understanding like how to pitch something to somebody that will get them to purchase your product, and making the right relationships with people to get them to, want to buy your product, but also to know you as, the person they're purchasing from was really important.
Right.
As well.
Yeah, that's really cool. So you started that business, and then what was your first introduction to real estate?
So my dad's an architect. So
okay.
I was interested in design and architecture from an early age based on that, but I hadn't really thought of the real estate space as a space I wanted to necessarily get into, mainly just because how do you know what you want to get into when you're in college or just generally at all? When I was a junior, after my junior year at WashU, I went and interned for the New York Mets because I was playing baseball, and I thought that could be an interesting thing to get into after college. The guy I interned for happened to be doing part of his time with Sterling Project Development, which was owned by the Wilpon family, who were the owner of the Mets, when I was interning there. So I did half my time in real estate, half my time with working on stuff for the Mets that summer, and I actually liked the real estate stuff more. So I thought, all right, maybe I should try and get into real estate. If I like this more than the baseball side stuff. So
interesting. So that would have been your junior year summer internship, and then coming back to St. Louis, did you get involved in real estate here in town as well?
A little bit. I interned at CBRE in the spring, I believe it was, of my senior year. And then I started applying for jobs in the real estate space. And there was also like a little real estate club where we toured some developments and whatnot that a friend of mine ran. So I toured a few projects in St. Louis while I was at WashU, and actually had a friend who really helped me figure out that development was kind of the path that was maybe the most interesting to me, who had spent a few summers interning at different companies in the real estate sector generally. So that was kind of my initial foray into the real estate sector. And then I got a job with a company that was a developer, but also did their own construction management. And it's a very small company when I started.
Was that JDS?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of lucked out in that way because got to learn a ton very quickly, and it was, very it didn't matter what your experience level necessarily was, and it was very like merit based. So however much you put in, you're able to kind of grow quickly from that. So learned a ton at JDS.
And you did some pretty large scale projects there, which is, you had to have done large scale if you're getting right into a $1.2 billion development with Good Developments Group.
Yeah. We did one of those super tall, skinny towers right on Central Park.
Yeah.
Did tallest building in Brooklyn. Did a 761 unit rental building that was actually 2 towers connected by a sky bridge on First Avenue in Manhattan. We did a handful of other projects in New York, mainly condo projects, Walker Tower, Stella Tower, project called the Fitzroy, project called 613 Baltic Street in Brooklyn, and then a handful of projects in Miami as well.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Monad Terrace, project that's going on right now, One Southside Park, which is actually a Mercedes-Benz branded condo tower that they're working through.
I've actually heard about that.
Yeah, very cool project.
Yeah.
So got to see all the aspects of a development project. Not necessarily like the specific details of every different aspect, but really over my time there, got a ton of experience in everything from insurance to construction management to the financing of a development project, which was like my real kind of focus there, and got to run our development team and led all like development and acquisitions over there before switching over to start my own thing at Good Developments.
How long were you with JDS?
About a decade.
A decade? Yeah. That's a long time.
Yeah.
That's a lot of projects to do in 10 years, though, too.
We did a lot of projects.
Especially for beginning as a small firm. That's a really cool development group to get involved with at the ground floor, pretty much.
Yeah, I'd say very lucky to get in at the time I did, and really learned a ton from the team there and people at the company, and got to see all sorts of different types of deals, which was definitely super unique, I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Because I remember, just thinking, wow, because you're a pretty young guy, I was like, this is a massive project that he's taken on. And then I started looking into your history. I'm like, oh, this is actually not the biggest one he's done. He's familiar.
Yeah, there's the type of things that are difficult for a project like Gateway South versus some of the stuff we're doing in, New York and Miami are very different, is what I'd say.
Yeah.
Doing those projects in New York and Miami that are kind of like, skyline redefining to some extent. You see that it all, comes down to the basics to some extent, like, how much does it cost to build the thing? How much is it worth? Like, what's the value add that is created from a project that you're doing? And what, from a real estate standpoint, like, are you purchasing something at a good basis? Is the site that you're buying in a location that isn't going away?
Right.
And kind of applied all those same ways of looking at a deal to Gateway South, as did when I was at JDS.
Yeah.
The main difference has been, mindset in a sense from the community.
Yeah.
In New York and Miami, you're doing a project, people think that project's happening.
Yeah.
and they tend to have some sort of issue with the project, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
Here, it's almost the opposite in a sense. Like, there's a heavy skepticism about the project happening.
Yeah.
But the backing for the project, seen almost no concern with, the actual programming, what the project will be.
Yeah.
It's more of a, all right, we'll see if it'll happen.
Yeah.
Which it's almost just like a flip to
Right.
doing stuff in New York and Miami.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. People around here are a little too cautious to get excited about something, but they're like, we want you to do it.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. And if you think about at least New York, if you're building a skyscraper next to a bunch of other buildings, you're either blocking a bunch of people's views in their condo, or they're renting their unit and you're doing construction the whole duration of their lease. So they're not necessarily as happy with you doing a project, next door.
Right. You're taking somebody's view, potentially.
Yeah. So again, here it's somewhat the opposite, which is nice in a lot of ways.
Yeah, because where you're located, you're really not taking that from anybody. You're really improving everybody's view, to be honest.
Yeah, that's one of the things I really liked about the site and project is there's no residents there, and it's a part of the city where that's sort of been forgotten in a sense. So it's really just a win-win opportunity for the region and the city.
Yeah. Yeah, and coming into this project, it is really... It's interesting that you were like building out this whole concept for the site itself. I think it demonstrates a lot about how you think. You have anywhere in the country you can pick. You were familiar with St. Louis, but I know CBRE, I think, was pretty instrumental in putting this lot together and kind of combining the lots.
Yeah, they were the initial broker for the first, I think, 10 or 12 acres of the site, and one of the brokers was a guy I had interned for when I was at CBRE. So that's how I kind of came to see the site in the first place, which is pretty interesting.
And that was the first 12.
Yeah.
Then you had to get like 88 more.
Yeah, there's a lot of phone calls and whatnot that had to be made.
And when you originally saw those first 12, had they had a concept of like construction hub, or you were just like, what do we make of this? And the idea kind of built out from there. So
at the time I was actually at JDS, we were looking at partnering up with an offsite builder to be 50-50 partners in the operating business, and then we were going to develop projects in New York and be the local contractor that took those, Lego blocks that the offsite manufacturing company was making, and we were going to be the ones to stack them and do the on-site construction. So I've been looking for where do you put a facility for that business, and saw the site and saw the different aspects of the characteristics of the site, and from that started to come up with the concept. So the two things kind of lined up pretty well together.
It is amazing. You talked about being able to step back from a situation. It's crazy when you look at all these different points in your life that kind of converged onto this concept. It all kind of, and then there was that final idea development. But it's wild that that broker had the land, JDS needed this. That's interesting. And it kind of demonstrates, and I don't know if you even would want to go on this tangent, but we were talking a little bit before the show, and I've emphasized how you're thinking from this first principles thinking, and we'd been talking. I've not talked with another guest about this, but it's something I'm interested in. For anybody who knows me, is like that blockchain space. And I know you've had experience there. This doesn't really have to do with, maybe it does have more to do with the development group than I think, but I know that's a fascination of yours as well.
I think new types of technologies are always really interesting to look into and see, what's going to be next and how is that going to potentially improve efficiency or not. And I think blockchain is an area where, if it's connected to real estate in the right way, can make a lot of sense to improve efficiency and allow different projects to happen in a smart way. We'll see how that kind of plays out, and I'm not totally sure if that'll have any applicability to Gateway South or not. I think hopefully at some point it does. It's not part of the, first phase or second phase, if you will, or whatever plan. But I do think that space is going to see a ton of growth. And I think that with any new technology, it takes some time for adoption. With blockchain particularly, it's somewhat of a, regulations required. There are a set of changes required from the regulation standpoint, which I think we'll probably see in the near future that'll allow that to see a lot of adoption. But it's a really interesting space to look into and see, what are the possibilities. If you think about, title to a property, in a sense, that's sort of like a blockchain.
Right. Yeah, it's a ledger.
Of who owned the thing. So
it's called chain of title. Which is kind of funny.
Now, I think Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies have been kind of the core focus of blockchain to date. I think that will probably shift over time. And I think there are some really interesting use cases that can take place. Currently, it's not something I'm focusing on necessarily, but I think over time there are some ways to really improve, again, the efficiency of ownership and the ability to create things using something like a blockchain is, in essence, like a form of a contract. And that's where my fascination came into is I had actually done some Zoom interviews with people a couple years back. One of them was with this company Proppy, and their whole mission is to put all residential deeds on chain and to help make the real estate home sale much more efficient. And then T0 was another group I had spoken with, and they're the ones who
tokenized and listed Aspen Digital, which was the St. Regis, and now those tokens, the basically shares of that real estate trade on that platform, kind of like a stock.
Yep.
So there are there's those first few things, and there was a lot of talk about them for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, because Bitcoin's the main focus, the price drops, and all of a sudden people aren't paying attention anymore. But
and I think the regulation side of it is one of the big factors into how useful those tools can be. And as that shifts, I think more and more stuff will end up heading into that sort of a direction. The same way, the internet, when that started, every business and company didn't have a website necessarily.
Right.
But now it's, very, typical. In fact, if you don't have a website, it'd be, very weird.
Yeah.
So I think blockchain will have that same sort of an effect. And my take would be that it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when it happens. So definitely a really interesting space to think about and get into, if you will. Yeah, you'll be one of those people who I'll be calling every few months just to let's get a lay of the land. Yeah.
What are you thinking? Because it's such an interesting space to track, and to your point with the regulation, lack of clarity, and just the process it takes. I know somebody was tokenizing a development down in Dallas, and he was like, look, it would be a lot cheaper and easier for us to go the traditional way, but we're just trying to prove proof of concept.
Yeah.
And most people are like, we don't care to spend that money and time just to prove this we'll let you go first. And once it's all established, we'll join the game. But that'll be interesting to kind of track.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting use case for sale real estate.
Yeah.
Where if you can trade, right now owning a home or a condo unit or whatnot, it's a very liquid asset. If you can turn that into a much more liquid asset, that can add a lot of value. And also I think, the potential for crowdfunding projects,
right,
where sales of tokens can equate to ownership stake in a project, is a really interesting use case for blockchain. And maybe even over time having some form of payment or for the workforce or people building a project, having some stake in the project they're building, and it really can hopefully align the interests of somebody working on something to the ownership stake in something, which can improve efficiency a bunch. How that plays out to come into existence, we'll see. But I think there's a ton of opportunity there.
Yeah, that liquidity concept has been kind of the main thing I've thought about, but that is very interesting in terms you'd be redefining sweat equity with if it's construction and part of almost like how people have stock options in companies. If you're,
it's like IPOing a building.
Yeah, right. Oh, I'm excited to keep up with you on that.
Yeah.
And then I guess talking future, we said we would talk Gateway South first, and probably that's all you are focusing on now. Do you have any further vision for Good Developments Group, or just trying to stay focused right now?
I'd say right now trying to stay focused. There's so many different tentacles to Gateway South that are really interesting. We're going to be doing a venture studio with a company called Redbud out of Columbia, Missouri, as an example. That's really, that'll be within Gateway South and part of Gateway South.
It's an adventure studio, you said?
A venture studio. So doing startup businesses
from
the project. They're a venture capital firm based out of Columbia. But again, that's very Gateway South focused. I think for the meantime, we're really like set on Gateway South, and there are a lot of different, aspects that can come from the project. But in the future, the way we're set up as a company, I think, this project is probably one of the more difficult ones to execute on, and setting up the team at the same time as executing on the project was part of I'd say, the hard part in a way.
Yeah.
And the opportunity in the future is pretty vast.
Yeah.
I would say. And my goal is to, build cool stuff that's beneficial for us, but also for the communities that we're, building stuff in. So that can take all sorts of different forms. So excited to get there, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys do have a good team over there. It is amazing on I didn't even think about the fact of building the team and the project all at once. Well, is a lot of your team, most of it is New York based, right?
We're kind of around the country. It's a lot of people some people who are at JDS with me previously, or people I'd worked with in my time at JDS, even if they weren't at JDS. And we're a pretty young group overall, but have a really diverse set of skills, which is great. And one thing that's been nice about the St. Louis area and market is the network of people we've met, and people I've met who want to help and get involved in one way, shape, or form is extremely strong. Where I don't think you'd have that same ability in another city, for example.
I notice, or I was thinking about this earlier, we were talking a lot about like the constructive criticism and growing up as like playing on a team, being an athlete. How has it been making that transition almost from like player, and now you're part of a team, but you're almost like the leader, like the coach?
Yeah.
What kind of insights have you gained with that transition of role? And I guess what does your day-to-day look like?
Yeah. Say my day-to-day is very diverse. I think in terms of, constructive criticism, even for myself, that's something where I could be spending a little bit more time in helping everybody on the team to spend more time working on their skill sets and understanding how, I would think about something versus how they're thinking about something, and setting up the structures and processes to be able to execute on that. Right now, it's somewhat of a diverse set of day-to-day activities, from, reviewing a financial model to talking to potential investors to doing site tours with, potential tenants. And it's a lot of different things, which is interesting in a lot of ways. But I think focusing in on spending more time on the team and the focus of the people on the team is actually really critical.
Yeah.
To being able to scale, and our capability as a whole can only get to the place its maximum potential, if you will, if everybody on the team is improving and getting to their maximum potential.
Yeah.
I'd say.
And that alignment sounds important as well.
Definitely. Yeah.
I don't know if you listen to different people on podcasts or whatever. I know Gary Vee is somebody who I'll listen to every once in a while, and I was listening to something the other day where he was talking about kind candor, and it's something that he struggled with a lot early in his career, like because you were saying like getting on that constructive criticism is probably kind of a weird feeling. I started just coaching hockey at the high school I went to, and I'm like, it's hard to even know what to tell somebody on how to improve in certain aspects when you would handle something some way and it comes kind of natural to you. How do you like coach that? Has that been something that you've noticed can be a challenge for you?
To some extent, I think I'm pretty good about that. It's making sure to take the time and not get caught up in everything else that's going on, and kind of blocking everything else out, and like working with somebody on the team on how to improve what they're working on. I do listen to a lot of podcasts also. Not so much Gary Vee, but I listen to podcasts on, like, I bump up the speed to like 3.5 times, which is a little bit crazy, I know, but can get through a bunch of them. Much quicker. But I think it's just really recognizing the priorities, but also recognizing that, like, there are certain things that they might not be like the most urgent thing in a way in that individual moment, but if you never make them the top priority, then you never get to a point where things really like running smoothly and efficiently.
Who are some of your favorite podcasts that you like to listen to, if you don't mind?
I like Lex Friedman. I like Robert Edward Grant. I like Andrew Huberman. And then there are a ton of others that I like to listen to. I like Joe Rogan. I mean, it's pretty like mainstream type of podcast. Also, the more I listen to somebody, the easier it is to pick up on everything they're saying when I dial it up to 3.5 times the typical speed. So
I can see why you would do 3.5 on a Lex Friedman podcast. They take their time. They're so good, though. He's very interesting, thoughtful. It doesn't surprise me that he resonates with you.
I like guys who have other sort of experts on it and then just are there to listen to the opinions of the experts in any sort of topic that they're delving into, as opposed to paying attention to the host's viewpoint.
I think Lex Friedman does a very good job of that.
Huberman
does good on both sides of it. He does very well when he's being interviewed, and he does a very good job interviewing.
He's got some interesting little like tricks always that I think are super smart.
I know there's some stuff that I do now, like in my daily routine, or kind of, where I forgot that I learned it from him. And then I'll stop doing something, and then I'll hear him say it. I'm like, oh, that's why I was doing that. And he was right. It felt much better when I was doing that. Is there any kind of like, speaking of like routine, like obviously the podcast called Dialed. So sometimes we like to talk about like, how do you stay dialed in, or are there any like routines or, weekly, daily rituals, regiments you like to follow?
I started doing this guy Wim Hof, like breathing techniques. This is super interesting, and I try and do jump rope, in the mornings. But frankly, other than that, I think in some sense having a better routine would be beneficial. In a way, that's one aspect of my day-to-day these days that's kind of difficult. There's so many different meetings and things going on that it's hard to have like a very like set routine, if you will. So
those are cool practices though, and because they're efficient. Jumping rope and breathing exercises are efficient. I find, and I've actually kind of dialed mine back a little bit, because I realized that I was spending way too much time like getting ready to get ready. It's like, come on, man, you don't need to spend 3 hours doing all this bullshit to then do your job. Like, you could probably just start doing your job right now. It's cool that you chose jump rope of all things too, because I know that the function of jumping up and down is actually, I'm sure that's like a Huberman thing he may have discussed.
Actually, I did boxing for a little while. So
Okay.
I did some sparring and whatnot. And from that, I really like doing jump rope and
Yeah.
really efficient and just, put on music and get the rhythm, and it's good
Yeah.
for you, I think, also.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Had you boxed for a while or just as a workout?
As a workout after college, and then I did some sparring against people, but then, getting a hit in the head wasn't maybe the best thing
Yeah.
to be doing, so I, stopped doing actual sparring.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you got to protect that brain. We got to
probably a
see.
good move, yeah.
Once you finish the development,
Then
it's
it
up
can
to
be-
you.
yeah,
But yeah, I guess, we've covered a lot of kind of what we planned on. Was there anything that we didn't cover? I also like to ask, like, if there's any, like, favorite books or quotes that you think of that have been particularly impactful.
I've started doing a lot more reading. I don't know if I have necessarily like a favorite book or quote per se.
Yeah.
But I think this notion of just try and help out as many other people as I can without necessarily having to, see what's in return, and surprising how much that comes back to be beneficial and make your network, or in helping you understand how you're doing something or whatnot when you're looking to help out somebody else. In a way, it just gets you out of your own perspective. I think looking at things from a different perspective is just really key, and reading and thinking about things from outside of your own, headspace is very crucial for improving. So
Yeah.
always be trying to get better. That's what I say.
Yeah, I think that's something that's missed kind of in our generation too, especially with the internet and the state of just the world. Is I always try to overemphasize, get out of your echo chamber as much as you can.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to I think that's why reading books too is so good, because you can focus on the message without it being interrupted. But even when you're on the internet, the algorithm is so it loves an echo chamber.
Yeah. Yep.
So I'm like, click on something that you disagree with and watch the whole thing. Hear them out.
Yep.
And
try and understand the perspective. It can only help you get a better perspective on your own set of viewpoints.
Yeah.
Right? If somebody has a different view than you, I'd rather hear them out, understand it, and try and convince them otherwise, as opposed to trying to shut them down and tell them their view doesn't make sense or whatnot. Understand why they maybe have that viewpoint.
Yeah, and it's amazing too how much more sophisticated your argument can sound when you actually have a well-rounded view of the issue.
Yep.
I've even noticed that with myself. Like, I'll say something probably because I heard it from somebody else, and my fiance does a good job of pushing back on, like, well, why?
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, shoot, I didn't know you were going to ask me to expand on that. Now I got to go build out my whole hypothesis, and I realize, like, I probably don't need to have such a strong opinion on most things. And then, go do your research and come back. So, we've kind of covered, what we wanted to talk about. Is there anything we didn't discuss that you wish we'd covered?
Say, let's do it again in a year.
Yeah, let's do it again in a year.
Yeah.
We'll meet back up.
Cool.
All right, we'll call it there.
Perfect.
Thanks, Greg.
again. It's a lot of fun.